Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. We have a blockbuster preview to get into. It's uncharted territory for Carlos Alcaraz and Daniil Medvedev for the Wimbledon semi-final, and the winner has the pleasure of playing either Novak Djokovic or Jannik Sinner. We've had four incredible players make it through to the semi-finals, and this is a great matchup. They've actually played each other once before at Wimbledon. We'll talk about that in a little bit more depth in a second. But before we do, remember to that like button, do subscribe if you're new, and do leave a rating or review if you're listening on a podcast platform. Okay, before we get into this, a couple of things. This is how we're going to break it down. Now, as usual, we're going to go through their route to the semi-finals, so the route to this stage so far. Then I'm going to talk about the head-to-head, and then on top of that, we are going to then break it down strategically and tactically how it might play out, and then ultimately I will give you guys my prediction as to who I think is going to win and by what scoreline. Not exactly like 6-3, 6-4, but straight sets, 4 sets, 5 sets, etc. Okay, let's then talk about their routes to the semi-finals. So Alcaraz has notched up quite a bit more grass court experience since the last time these two met at Wimbledon. Medvedev has also done the same, and we'll talk about that, not just about their matches, but how they've looked and potentially the type of tactics they might have been utilizing. So Alcaraz had and has had a pretty difficult run, and the reason why I think a lot of people saw it as difficult is because he's still very inexperienced on grass, and after winning Queens, though, that quelled, I think, a lot of people's fears about him not being ready to make a really good run at Wimbledon. The last result that he had at Wimbledon last year was losing to Jannik Sinner in the round of 16. He's now gone beyond that, and he's in the semi-finals, and he's the favourite, I think, going into this to make the final. So he beat Jeremy Chardy and Muller, both Frenchmen, in straight sets. Nicolas Jarry was definitely a tough test. He came through against him in 4 sets, and Matteo Berrettini, who we know is very dangerous on grass and made the final in 2021, he beat him in 4 sets as well after Berrettini played a really good match against Zverev, but maybe not his best, but even if he wasn't his best, I think Alcaraz is still the favorite there. He then came through impressively in 3 tight sets against Holger Rune, a fellow 20-year-old, and Holger Rune has been in great form this year, of course. And look, I mean, the first set was a tiebreaker. Alcaraz managed it well, though, and came through 7-6, 6-4, 6-4. So that's his run to the semi-finals. For Medvedev, he's had an easier run of, and I think that's fair to say. He beat the Brit Ferry in the first round in straight sets and Manarino in straight sets, which is a good victory for me because I actually thought that could be a potential upset after losing to him in some of the grass court matches before Wimbledon. He then beat Fucsovics, who's always solid in 4 sets, and Lehechka in straights as well, though he won the first 2 sets and Lehechka had to retire. Then he came up against Christopher Eubanks, who's played some phenomenal tennis at Wimbledon, notching up the most ever winners at Wimbledon for an ATP player in history, which is just incredible, by the way. He, unfortunately, fell short, and Daniil Medvedev came back from 2 sets to 1 down to win in 5. An incredible victory. Will that take anything out of Medvedev physically? Not so sure, to be honest, but we can touch upon that in a second as well. In terms of the head-to-head, they've only played each other twice, and the head-to-head is 1-1. They played once in 2021 when Medvedev beat Alcaraz in straight sets. Then they played at Indian Wells this year, only a few months ago, and Alcaraz beat Medvedev on a hard court, though, albeit at Indian Wells 6-3, 6-2 in the final. And it was a very comprehensive victory. Very, very comprehensive. It wasn't a thrashing, but it was comprehensive. Okay, now let's talk about this from a strategic and technical standpoint. So there's definitely a lot to unpack here. So what I'm going to do first of all is give you guys a quick overview as to how they've both been playing. Now, Alcaraz hasn't, in my view, changed too much in terms of his style of play on grass. The one thing that he's definitely been doing more of is hitting the backhand slice. He knows it's a useful tool on grass, and especially hitting a backhand slice to approach the net. He's also been willing, or more willing even, to come forward, hug the baseline more, trying to hit the ball a bit early. For Daniil Medvedev, now, what's been very interesting for me anyway is that before Wimbledon and after, when he was having that incredible run, he was trying to transition more to the net and actually trying to attack the net at times. At Wimbledon, though, from what I've seen, especially in that match against Christopher Eubanks, which, by the way, was 5 sets, he came to the net 8 times. That's just under 2 times a set. That is absolutely nothing. I mean, that means that he is hugging the baseline throughout the whole match. Now, that's the Medvedev of old. It was obviously good enough against Christopher Eubanks, although he just got through. I don't think that that tactic is going to be the right tactic against Alcaraz, but the issue he has is that if he comes forward, he could easily get picked off at the net because he's not particularly natural volleying, and also his transition game isn't the best. And Alcaraz is incredibly good at passing opponents at the net and also being able to hit beautiful lobs as well, as we've seen. So what I'm going to do is, rather than going to a very, very specific serve and return and forehand to forehand and backhand to backhand, which we might end up getting onto, I want to talk about some things to watch out for, what we might see unfold, and also mainly focusing on actually what both players need to do in order to win and what they should look to do, but might be unable to do as well. So for Alcaraz, it's very important that he utilizes and takes advantage of Medvedev's deep return position. Even on grass, Medvedev still returns super deep. On the clay, it's fine because a lot of people do it, and you can get away with it for the most part in large periods. Although that's why we did see people still serve volleying against him even on clay because they knew they could utilize that tactic and they'd still get some success. Alcaraz is going to do that against Medvedev. Now, there's a few things here to factor in. Alcaraz is going to use wide serves against Medvedev like he did in Indian Wells, and he's also going to charge the net. He's not going to come forward in every single point. He might hit a serve out wide, for example, a slice serve from the deuce side, out wide to the Medvedev forehand, get him on the stretch, come forward and volley. But there also might be instances where he does that, and then he says, okay, well, I'm not going to continue to do that because Medvedev's probably going to go down the line. It might be a hard return for him, but he's still going to go for it. And Medvedev, generally speaking, makes quite a few returns, especially if you compare it to the rest of the tour. He is up there in the top 5, I would say, returners on tour. Alcaraz might say, okay, well, then I'm happy to hit a backhand because I know it's probably going to be a backhand, or because it's so far back, even though it's a fast grass court, and it's going to stay low, I've still got enough time because I'm athletic enough and Medvedev's so far back to actually make that into a forehand. And most likely it's going to be an into-in forehand or an into-out forehand. Now, if he's dragged Medvedev out loads, it's probably going to be an into-out forehand because he goes into-in. Medvedev, by the time he starts to come back to the middle to defend and correct his positioning, it actually ends up being a probably quite an easy ball for Medvedev to get back. If Medvedev, however, isn't as far out wide and has recovered nicely, he might then go in behind him. That's when he then might come forward after that +1 shot. And that's when Medvedev's going to potentially be in trouble. He might also, to be fair, go serve and drop shot. We've seen that a lot on all surfaces for Alcaraz, and it's an effective tool. And normally what he does is he'll serve out wide and then he'll go drop shot to the opposite side. And it's just incredibly clever because the reason why it's clever, if you think about it from a distance point of view, he's dragged Medvedev out to the furthest point, right? Say if we talk about it from the juice side, he's gone out wide. Medvedev's gone all the way out to the forehand side. Then he'll hit a drop shot onto the ad side as short as he can, right? Which would be technically onto Medvedev's backhand, and Medvedev's having to run diagonally in the longest stretch possible on the court to then retrieve it. Most likely, he's not going to get that. And if he does, it's not going to be a good shot. Alcaraz is probably going to finish it off next, or he might get a racket on it, but won't make the ball. So that's something to look out for, and something that he's definitely going to utilize against Medvedev. The other thing that we might see is Medvedev, Alcaraz, even not only doing that on serve, on the return, trying to push Medvedev as well, especially on the second serve, because I think Medvedev's first serve, especially on grass, and he's got a good slice serve, his serve is very potent on grass, really potent. He's got an incredible serve anyway, especially the first serve anyway. Second serve can be a little bit iffy at times. I think Alcaraz will look to attack that. Similarly, I think for Daniil Medvedev, he'll look to do the same because Alcaraz might hit the kick serve to Medvedev, but that actually might play into his hands because he's very tall. And in all honesty, the ball's bouncing lower at Wimbledon. I don't think he necessarily likes taking the ball at ankle height. So he's going to end up hitting a lot of backhands or forehands that are decent. I would say the sweet spot for him on second serve returns, and he is going to look to push and be aggressive on the second serve Alcaraz. He's not going to come to the net loads, as I said. I mean, maybe he will. Maybe he will change his tactic. I also don't see him adjusting his return position. And I actually think mentally, this matchup is not good for Medvedev because he will remember that Indian Wells matchup. And even though it was a best of three, I have to say, I don't necessarily see Medvedev being able to make the necessary adjustments to win this match, whether it be on grass or clay or hardcore. I just think the matchup isn't great for him because Alcaraz, when he's at his near his best, I think when he's playing 8 out of 10 or better, what he's able to do is soak up Medvedev's offensive game, which isn't top five in the world, and then he's also able to say, okay, well, you're a wall. I'm still going to get you into super uncomfortable positions with the drop shot, with the lob, with the into-out forehand, even with the angles on the backhand, and now the slice as well on grass, and make it awkward, slice into your back on your forehand, really get you to go get under the ball, which we've seen a lot of people, for example, slicing into the forehand of Medvedev, and it's similar to Swiatek, where they've got these very extreme grips on the forehand, which means it's a lot less natural for them to get under the slice and generate that top spin and get under it and get over the net with a lot of ease anyway. It's just technically harder for them to do so. There's other things about that extreme grip which has an advantage over the so-called, let's say, normal or traditional grips, let's say. But in this instance, the slice is not one. And Alcaraz's slice has improved as well, which is a positive for him. I also think Alcaraz is able to mix it up a little bit. And there was someone who said, I've forgotten which player it was, but when they played him, they said after that every ball they got back in rallies was different. So, for example, they might get a two or three or four forehands in a row, but every forehand they'd get, they just felt like it was a different weight or different speed or had different spin on it. And that's not to say that he's hitting, extreme slice and extreme spin and then extremely flat ball, but he's mixing it up. He is mixing it up, and it's these small adjustments probably each ground stroke, but it makes a difference. And the one thing he's really good at is hitting angles, Alcaraz. He's also good at being able to stick with opponents and has good shot tolerance for the most part. He's become more patient, and that's something that I think when he plays Medvedev, especially at Indian Wells, what I found was that he took that as a massive challenge to say, you know what? I know you're incredible when it comes to shot tolerance, and you're barely ever going to miss any ball that you shouldn't be. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to match you for that. And because at Wimbledon the courts are quicker and they bounce lower, which I think is actually, I don't necessarily think either player is super natural on grass at the moment, if I'm being honest. It's still more suited, though, I think, to Alcaraz's game. And I'll tell you why. Even though Medvedev hits the ball very flat, which you'd assume means that he should be very, very good on grass, the balls coming back to the opponents can be difficult. But the balls that he receives, he doesn't feel comfortable with them. He doesn't. He is very good going to the opponent, but receiving those shots on grass, I don't think he's super comfortable. And that's my assessment on it. I also don't think his movement, which I think is still very good on grass, is as comfortable as it is on hard court. But then similarly, I don't think Alcaraz's movement is as good on grass as it is on, say, a clay court or even a hard court. So, something interesting to ponder. I don't think these guys are the most natural players on grass. But at the same time, I think this really sets up a really interesting match. Medvedev has to serve really well. High percentage of first serves, needs to push Alcaraz. Alcaraz, there are definitely moments where he's not hitting the return as, let's say, he's not playing the percentages as much as he should be. However, what he's been doing recently, and I referenced Amy Lundy in one of my previous videos, and I'll reference her again because she's the one that said it, and I've definitely observed it as well, is that Alcaraz has been taking a leaf out of the Djokovic playbook and saying, okay, maybe I need to take a little bit of pace off my returns because either I'm not making them or they're too short into court and I'm being left susceptible to being on the defensive straight away for returns that I feel I should be either on the front foot or at neutral at least. So then he said, okay, I'm going to go deep down the middle and take a little bit of pace off. I'm not going to moonball it, but I'm going to take a little bit of pace off. I'll either go out their feet or I'm going to go deep down the middle, so enough so that the opponent, my opponent, is not able to hit anything offensive off that. Now, that's a really big thing because I think Medvedev, when he's serving, especially if the opponent makes a return, his next shot is actually always trying, in my opinion, from what I've seen, to be aggressive. And that might sound weird, but since the start of this year, since he's tried to be more aggressive on the forehand, it's definitely something that I have noticed. And against Chris Eubanks, I think he hit ridiculous. I think he hit 50 odd winners to 16, 17 unforced errors, if I'm not mistaken, which is like a ridiculous return. He is making slightly more errors, but barely any more errors than he used to, but he's hitting a lot more winners. So he's found this calculated aggression, which is a real positive. The backhand we know is really good. I think it's very consistent. And that's where Medvedev might try to hurt Alcaraz with the backhand. I think the backhand line is important for Medvedev. I think he needs to. I get he'll want to try and trap Alcaraz in the backhand to backhand because that's where he probably feels he might be able to have some success. But what I would say is that he needs to be careful because if he doesn't hit with enough angle, Alcaraz will make that into a forehand. But the one positive he has on that backhand side for me is that because it's so flat, and because he actually does find really good angles on it, most likely Alcaraz is going to have to hit backhand. Now, the issue might be the backhand that comes back might not be a topspin or drive backhand. It's most likely, in a lot of instances, will be a slice backhand. And Medvedev will then have to generate his own pace, and it's going to be quite predictable because I don't see him hitting a backhand line in response to a backhand slice cross court from Alcaraz, and therefore I think it becomes a bit more predictable. Unless Alcaraz hits a backhand slice that's not with enough angle, Medvedev might do what a lot of players on the ATP tour don't tend to do, which is almost run around the forehand and hit into our backhand, which is actually a very effective tool for Medvedev. And on grass, it causes a lot of damage. Alcaraz on grass is depending on the backhand side, he's not incredible. But what I would say is that he has improved the slice, which has meant that it definitely has improved somewhat. It definitely has improved somewhat. On the forehand side, on the run, he's extremely good. But what I would say is for Medvedev, forehand to forehand, he's not going to fancy his chances there. He's really not. Even though Medvedev soaks up forehands quite well and finds good angles, Alcaraz's pure athleticism gets him out of trouble in a lot of instances. And he's able to match, if not exceed, Medvedev's shot tolerance or athleticism in a lot of cases. And that's why I find it very difficult to really make a strong case for Medvedev winning this match because I don't really see where he's going to be able to really outskill or exceed Alcaraz in any facet of this matchup. The return, I don't necessarily see it. The serve, potentially, although I think Alcaraz is going to be able to back up the serve better. So as a standalone weapon, you could say, yeah, Medvedev serves better. But I think as a package and what comes after that, I think Alcaraz matches, if not is better than Medvedev behind it. And then from the back of the court, I think Alcaraz has more variation. He's able to, control the forehand, able to hit the backhand slice as well as variation. He's able to hit with different spins and also more angle and different balls as well. So the flatter ones, more topspin, etc., and make your opponent really struggle to find rhythm. He's able to come forward, transition well, and volley. He's also able to utilize a drop shot. And that's a Medvedev, if he's going to be far behind the baseline, he's going to get drop shots to the lot. That happened in Indian Wells a lot. Now, those are slower courts, but what Alcaraz does very well, because these courts bounce lower, if Alcaraz is on song with a drop shot, he doesn't necessarily need to hit an incredible drop shot because it just won't bounce much, and Medvedev will be struggling and scampering to get there. Another point, by the way, is that I actually think Alcaraz can sometimes be susceptible to the drop shot. I think Medvedev has tried to add that to his game. It's something he should try and utilize against Alcaraz, but in order to do that, he needs to be on the front foot. and that's where then it gets interesting, right? So we'll see how Medvedev, sorry, even approaches this. I don't see him coming to the net a lot like he did against Eubanks, um, where again he just came to the net 8 times. I think that will play into Alcaraz's hands. Although if he were to come to the net, I still don't see that making a difference. So my prediction is going to be Alcaraz in 4 sets. I think maybe Medvedev might take a set. I don't see him taking two, and I wouldn't be surprised if Alcaraz wins in straight sets. Now, one of the things I haven't really factored in, and we talked about the mental side with that Indian Wells victory that Alcaraz had. He'll probably take confidence from that, which is great. And Medvedev, as I said, might go into this being a little bit scared, and he said it after, to be fair, which I think, in my eyes, is a big no-no. That no one wants to be on his side of the draw. To me, though, there might also be pressure on Alcaraz. He had pressure in that semi-final against Djokovic, where a lot of people thought he might win. He then, the occasion got the better of him. He started cramping, etc. Might we see something similar here, where there is the promise or let's say, the prospect of playing Novak Djokovic again in the final, and in a Wimbledon Grand Slam final, will that play on his mind and potentially affect him? You would hope and say probably not, because he's going to go one match at a time, but let's see. Anyway, that's our prediction. Let me know in the comment section below your thoughts on this matchup. It's a really interesting one. I do think Alcaraz's style is just not quite right for Medvedev currently, but let me know your thoughts. Thank you very much, guys. Stay safe and well. We'll see you.